now that we understand labor demand, let's see if we can figure out what shifts the labor demand curve. That's going to play a large role in changes in employment, in particular the ones we're observing most recently. So learning objective 3 is precisely that. Let's try to understand shifts in labor demand. So what is it that shifts labor demand? So before we get there, just a little bit of the terminology. So an increase in labor demand, or a shift to the right. So I'm going to abbreviate labor demand by LD, which is a shift right, is going to look like the following. So if I plot my labor demand with the quantity of labor on the horizontal axis, the wage on the vertical axis, the labor demand curve, the first one, if that shifts to the right, it's simply a parallel shift. Labor demand 2, a decrease in labor demand, or a shift left, is simply going to be a leftward movement. So we have labor, the wage, take labor demand 1. If we decrease labor demand, it's going to shift to the left, which looks like this. So now we understand what direction labor demand is shifting. Got a little bit more practice plotting out a labor demand curve. Now, how do we figure out what actually shifts this thing? Well, it's not too terribly complicated. If you remember what determines labor demand, it is precisely this value of the marginal product. Okay, so as the wage changes, we move along that labor demand curve. That doesn't shift the labor demand curve. So we think about labor demand being determined by the value of the marginal product. Sorry, value of the marginal product. I have it spelled wrong here. I'll fix that. Equal to the wage. The wage changes move us along the curve. So a shift in the curve has to be an entire change in the value of the marginal product. So what could change that? Well, what was the value of the marginal product? We write that out. The value of the marginal product was the price times the marginal product of labor, which was how much more productive, in our example, how many more car washes each worker could produce. So if this changes, it has to be either because the price of the good changed, or something happened that changed how productive our workers were, or the marginal product of labor. So let's take a look at what that would be. So what shifts the labor demand curve? As I said, a change in the price. Pretty straightforward. If the price goes up, the labor demand curve is going to shift to the right. If the price goes down, the labor demand curve is going to shift to the left, because the value of the marginal product has gone in that direction. Each extra worker adds more or less to revenue depending on the price of the good. Now these three down here all amount to effectively changing the marginal product of labor. The additional labor, or the additional output that each extra worker is able to produce. So a change in the demand for the good or service. So if you take an example, think of Party City. So what does Party City produce? Well, they have a bunch of supplies and things that you can go and buy if you want to have a big party. So if you imagine in the current situation where we have the coronavirus pandemic, where we're not supposed to even get together with a few people, let alone have a party. So parties are pretty much off limits, right? So how productive is a particular worker at Party City going to be? Not very, right? So when the demand for the service goes down, each worker is less productive. The marginal product goes down. So demand for the good goes down. The marginal product is going to go down. And so the value of the marginal product goes down, or labor demand is going to go down, shift to the left. Conversely, if demand increases, the marginal product is going to increase, and labor demand is going to increase. So if you look at grocery delivery services right now, so a service, dropped my pen. You look at this service Shipt. Well, they deliver groceries for us. So I can go on an app. I can fill up my grocery cart, somebody else goes and buys my groceries. Well, demand is very high for a service like that right now. And so labor demand, the number of workers they want to hire, has similarly increased or shifted to the right. Okay, so the demand for the product has a big impact on how productive workers are going to be in that sense. You can produce more car washes if people want to buy more car washes. Related to that, changing in the marginal product, we have changing technology. So if the technology to produce a particular good or service changes that makes workers more or less productive, that is similarly going to increase the marginal product of labor. So if the technology makes you more productive, labor demand increases. If the technology, for whatever reason, makes you less productive, then labor demand is going to decrease. Changing input prices works in a similar way, which can make workers potentially more or less productive in terms of their value of the marginal product. So let's go back to our car wash example. Think about changing input prices. So if the car wash machine gets less expensive, generally speaking, I can buy more of those, which is going to increase how productive each worker is. So if I have more car wash machines, the marginal product of each worker is going to increase, and that's going to increase labor demand. Now, if the input prices get more expensive, then labor demand is going to decrease. I'm going to buy fewer machines. If I have fewer machines, each worker is going to be less productive. So these are the main factors that decrease or increase labor demand. And you want to think of it basically as breaking it down to either the price of the good changed or something changed the productivity of the workers. And we've given ourselves a few examples here of things that could shift labor demand to the left or to the right. So take a look at this example here in the car wash to see what happens when the price of the car wash decreases to $7. Recalculate the value of the marginal product in each case, which will be the marginal product times $7 now, and see what happens to labor demand. So if we took the wage at $120, before, remember, we wanted to hire 2 workers. So we'll see what happens in this case. And so the marginal product, if you go back, was 20, 15, and 5. And so the value of the marginal product in this case is now going to be 140. 20 times 7 is the new price of the good. 105. 15 times 7. $70. 10 times 7. And 35, which is 5 times 7, the value of the marginal product. Now, in this case, if the wage is $120, we see that we don't want to hire that second worker because the value of the marginal product is less than the wage. I want to hire only 1 worker. And so as the price increased, the quantity of labor demanded went down, and that's going to happen at every possible wage. And so the labor demand curve is going to decrease or shift to the left.